Stephen King is such a big name that he is underrated. On the contrary, credibility comes before exaggeration for him. I have served as a Maine State police officer for over 24 years, and I can tell you unequivocally that there are creatures in the northern woods far beyond your imagination. Creatures that walk on two legs but are not human, roads that shouldn't exist, towns that appear and disappear. Not at all. My name is Daniel Theriot, badge number 731. I'm recording this for you from my cabin near Millinocket because, unfortunately, I can't give you an official report on what happened in February 2020. They retire me for so-called psychological reasons. Who knows? Maybe they'll throw me in jail. But someone needs to know about State Road 11A, the one that only exists in winter. That's not on any map, that never was and never will be. If you're watching this from Maine, you'll understand what I mean about the North Woods. It's not just the cold or the desolation, but the silence that affects you, the feeling that the trees might spring up and attack you, the deep sense of loneliness that envelops you even when you're 70 miles from the nearest settlement. If you've ever driven through Aroostook County at night and felt like someone was following you, leave a comment. I'm sure you have more to share. About the 17 people who were hopelessly lost on a road that doesn't exist. A town abandoned in 1931, but where coffee is still freshly brewed. And the fact that I will never patrol north of Baxter State Park again in my life. I know you'll dismiss this story as just another forest ghost story, but believe me, I want you to know that I have dashcam footage. At least I have enough to convince you. Parts that show it really exists, even if it seems impossible. I have something else too. The passenger list of a bus that disappeared in 1991. When I found that bus last winter, the engine was still running and the passengers were in their seats. They were still waiting and watching. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning. Let me tell you what happened when I first found Route 11A. February is particularly harsh in northern Maine. It's not just cold. It's the kind of cold that stings your lungs when you breathe, that sticks your eyelashes together, that can kill you in 20 minutes if your car breaks down and you're not prepared. I was working at the F unit in Houlton and was responsible for an area covering Aroostook County, which spans 6,829 square miles. This area is larger than Connecticut and Rhode Island combined and is home to approximately 70,000 people. Most of Maine is empty, but this region we call the county is different. There are potato fields, forest roads, and miles of dark spruce forests that haven't changed since the last ice age. It was around 9 p.m. on February 13th, 2020, and I was patrolling Route 11 north of Patton. It had been snowing non-stop for 3 days and the snowplows were struggling to keep up. I had already responded to 2 skids and a log truck rollover. The radio had been quiet for the last hour, which was unusual in this weather. I later learned that all base stations and radio repeaters within a 10-mile radius had stopped working at exactly 8:47 p.m. I was passing the old Bolin Road junction when I saw headlights to my right. This was wrong for 2 reasons. First, there was no road there. Second, the headlights were angled upward at about 30 degrees, as if someone had climbed onto a steep embankment. I pulled over, grabbed my flashlight, and scanned the trees. There was a road. I had probably patrolled this section of Route 11 500 times in my career. I knew every intersection, every forest road, every deer trail. That road shouldn't have been there. But it was. A smooth asphalt road with faint yellow lines disappearing into the woods at an angle that didn't match the terrain I knew. The headlights I saw belonged to a new model Ford F-150 pickup truck, its hazard lights flashing. About 50 meters up this impossible road, its nose was buried in a snowdrift. I reported the situation, but only static came back. The radio was completely dead, which sometimes happened in this bad weather, but my cell phone wasn't showing a signal either. Even my GPS had stopped working, the screen just showing a circle spinning as if trying to figure out where I was. I made a life-changing decision. I turned onto the road that shouldn't have been there. The moment my tires touched that road, everything felt different. The sound of the wind stopped completely, as if someone had pressed a button. The snow was still falling, but it was falling straight down, not swirling around as it had in the storm just a minute before. And my car's temperature gauge started climbing from minus 15 degrees Fahrenheit to a relatively warm 20 degrees Fahrenheit. The road was in perfect condition, which made no sense. There were no frost marks, potholes, or salt damage. It looked like it had been newly paved, but the style of the road, its width, the way the lines were painted, all looked old, like the 1950s. There were even small glass reflectors on the asphalt, the kind that had been discontinued decades ago. I reached the F-150 and got out, my hand instinctively checking my gun. 24 years as a cop had taught me to trust my instincts, and all my instincts were screaming danger. "State Police," I called out. "Everyone okay?" The truck was empty. The engine was running, the heater was on full blast, modern country music was playing on the radio. The driver's door was open and there were footprints leading down the road. They were fresh, no more than 10 or 15 minutes old. I looked back toward Route 11 thinking I needed to go back for help, but I couldn't see it anymore. The road I had just come from curved in a way that would block the view, but since the road I had just come from was straight, that was impossible. And the snow, in some places the snow was falling vertically, in others it was drifting horizontally, creating patterns that were hard to follow with the eyes. I followed the footprints. About 100 meters ahead, the road widened and reached a place that looked like a small town. It wasn't a modern town. It looked like something out of a history book. A general store with a hand-painted sign, a small church with a bell tower, a restaurant with an old Coca-Cola sign made of tin, the kind you see in antique shops. In total, maybe 15 buildings, all perfectly maintained, all with lights on inside. But there was no one there. There was only one car, a 1952 Buick Roadmaster parked in front of the general store, keys in the ignition, engine running. The exhaust was constantly spewing white smoke in the cold air. Footprints led to the restaurant. The sign read, "Millfield Restaurant, established 1928. I could see lights on through the windows and steam rising from the coffee pot on the stove. I pushed open the door, and a small bell chimed above my head. "Hello. State Police, anyone there?" The diner was spotless. Chrome and red vinyl, black and white checkered floor, the smell of coffee and something else, maybe bacon or ham, the smell of fresh food. There were 3 cups of coffee still steaming on the counter. The clock on the wall read 11:17, but it wasn't moving. The second hand was stuck between 4 and 5, twitching as if trying to move but unable to. The grill behind the counter was still hot. 3 hamburger patties were sizzling on it. A basket of French fries sat in bubbling oil. Someone had been here just a few minutes ago. Maybe they were still here. "I'm Trooper Terriol with the Maine State Police," I called out louder. "If anyone can hear me, please respond." That's when I saw the newspaper on the counter. The Millfield Gazette dated March 15, 1931. The headline read, "Town prepares for winter storm." But the paper looked fresh, as if it had just been printed. I touched it carefully, the ink rubbed off on my fingers. I heard a sound like footsteps coming from the kitchen. I drew my gun and moved cautiously around the counter. State Police. "Put your hands where I can see them." The kitchen was empty, but the back door was slightly ajar, as if someone had just come out of it. I followed it out onto the street behind the buildings. The footprints continued here, but now there were more. Many more. It was as if a dozen people had passed this way, all heading in the same direction, toward the church at the end of the street. The church was one of those classic New England white wooden buildings with a tall steeple. The doors were open, and a sound was coming from inside. They were singing. Hymns were being sung. There were multiple voices, but the words weren't English. It wasn't any language I recognized. The melody was familiar, Amazing Grace, but somehow it was wrong, as if it were being played in a minor key. With my gun still drawn, I approached the doors cautiously. Inside, I could see the church pews were full. At least 40 people, all facing forward, all singing. But they weren't moving. Not at all. They sat motionless, mouths open, the sounds coming from them, but their lips or throats weren't moving. It was as if the sound wasn't coming from them, but was being played through them. And their eyes were completely black. No whites, no irises, just black from corner to corner. In the front row, I recognized someone wearing modern clothes. A North Face jacket, jeans, winter boots. New clothes, current styles. This was the person I was following. But they, too, sat motionless like the others, singing without moving their lips, their eyes as black as night. I slowly backed away, my heart beating so fast it drowned out the sound of the songs. When I reached the door, all the songs stopped at once. Everyone in the church turned their heads toward me, moving in perfect unison. 40 pairs of black eyes were staring at me. "Join us!" The voice came from all of them at once, 40 mouths moving in perfect unison. "The path has chosen you. Join us in Millfield. Join us in the eternal winter I ran. I ran back through the town, past the restaurant still cooking food, past the general store with its lights shining. The footprints I had been following had vanished, erased as if they had never existed. But new ones appeared behind me, following me, closing in even though I couldn't see anyone. I reached my patrol car and put it in reverse, driving backward down the road as fast as I dared. The speedometer showed I was going 30 miles per hour backward, but the scenery passed slowly, as if I weren't moving at all. The road seemed longer than before, stretching on and on, refusing to let me go. Then, suddenly, I was back on Route 11. The storm hit me with full force. The wind rocked the car. Snow covered my windshield. I turned the wheel, nearly sliding into the ditch, but managed to keep the car on the road. When I looked back, the intersection was gone. There was no road, only the row of sturdy trees I had known for 24 years. My radio started working again. "Unit 731, what is your location? We lost contact for about 10 minutes. I looked at the dashboard clock. It was 9:23 p.m. I had been in that town for at least an hour, but only 10 minutes had passed outside. "Unit 731, I'm on Route 11, heading north at the 47-mile marker. Everything's fine." "Roger, 731, there's a search warrant for a dark blue F-150, Maine license plate 7739RX. A missing person report just came in. Have you seen it?" "A pickup truck on an impossible road." "No," I lied. "I'll keep my eyes peeled." I returned to the station in Holton, my hands shaking the whole way. In the parking lot, I sat in my car for a long time before going inside, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. Finally, hoping I'd imagined it all, I checked my dash cam. The footage was there, but it was corrupted. Most of it was static, but there were some images, a few frames of the road that shouldn't have been there, a couple of seconds of the town, a brief shot of the church. And in one frame, it was so fast I had to pause it to see it, all those black eyes staring at the camera. I never wrote a report about that night. What would I say? That I found a town that disappeared in 1931, that the missing driver of the F-150 sat in a church that didn't exist, singing hymns in his mind with his mouth motionless. But this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. Because the road continued to appear in different places along Route 11, always in winter, always at night. And more people continued to disappear. And I continued to find evidence of the town of Millfield that couldn't possibly exist. A town waiting for something. A town gathering people for something. And 2 weeks after my first encounter, I learned what that something was. Within 2 weeks of my first encounter with Route 11A and the town of Millfield, 3 more people disappeared along the Route 11 corridor. Each time, their vehicles were found abandoned in places where other officers swore there were no side roads, no place to go. Each time, the missing persons fit a pattern I began to notice. They were alone, traveling at night during a snowstorm, and they all shared one common trait, though it took me a while to figure it out. I began keeping my own records, separate from the official reports. I pored over old missing persons files, the archives of the Bangor Daily News, even microfiche from the Presque Isle Library dating back to the 1920s. What I found chilled my blood. Millfield was real, or it was. It was a logging town founded in 1897, about 15 miles north of Patten. Its population peaked at around 400 in 1925. Then came the winter of 1931. According to records, the entire town vanished during a blizzard in March. It wasn't destroyed, evacuated, it vanished. Search parties found no trace of buildings, roads, or people. It was as if the town had been surgically removed from reality. The official explanation was an avalanche that buried everything too deep to be found. However, there were no mountains near Millfield capable of producing an avalanche. The terrain was relatively flat, with only hills covered in spruce and fir trees. The state eventually declared all residents dead and seized the land. The land later became part of the North Maine woods. But there was something I found in personal letters and diaries at the Historical Society that wasn't in the official records. People continued to see Millfield years after it disappeared. Hunters would stumble upon it by chance in snowstorms, but lose it when the weather cleared. Truckers reported seeing a town with lights that shouldn't have been there. And sometimes, people who went looking for it disappeared themselves. I mapped all the disappearances that occurred near the old Millfield area. Dozens of incidents had occurred over the decades, clustered in specific patterns. These incidents peaked in certain years, 1952, 1973, 1991, and now 2020. Not exactly, but roughly every 20 years. I couldn't find the connection until I compared the dates with meteorological data. Solar activity. Each increase in losses coincided with periods of heightened solar activity. Solar flares, geomagnetic storms, events that caused the northern lights to appear further south than usual. Events that could disrupt radio waves, disturb magnetic fields, and, according to some fringe scientists, weaken the boundaries between dimensions. The night I found Millfield, there was a major solar storm. The northern lights were visible as far south as Boston. 2 weeks after my first encounter, another solar storm was predicted for February 27th. The Space Weather Prediction Center issued warnings about possible radio blackouts and GPS interference. I knew the path would reappear, and this time I would be prepared. I prepared carefully. I told my wife I would be working double shifts, and she accepted it with the weary resignation of someone married to a cop for 20 years. I loaded extra supplies into my car. Flares, emergency food, water, a handheld GPS device, a film camera, digital cameras seemed to malfunction, around Millfield, and one more thing, my grandfather's rosary. I'm not a religious man. I haven't been to Mass since my mother's funeral, but Grand-Père Thériault was a devout Catholic who also believed in old French-Canadian folklore. He told me stories about loups-garous, witch candles that led travelers astray, and places where the world was thin. La route qui ne devrait pas exister, he would say. The road that shouldn't exist. He had blessed this rosary himself, saying it would protect against things that live between worlds. I began my patrol at sunset, driving slowly north on Route 11. The storm was intensifying and the aurora danced across the sky. Green and blue streaks seemed to leap with purpose. The radio was full of static, and my dashcam was malfunctioning, recording only intermittently. At 8:47 p.m., exactly the same time as before, everything fell silent. The static stopped, the wind died down, and there it was. Route 11A, turning right just past the 52-mile marker. This time it was in a different place, 5 miles south of where I first saw it. But it was the same road, I was sure. The same impossible angle, the same perfect asphalt, the same faint yellow lines. I turned onto that road. The change happened instantly. The temperature rose, snow began falling in impossible directions, and my engine started running erratically, as if something was interfering with the electronics. I drove slowly, watching for other vehicles or people. About a quarter of a mile later, I found the first car, a 2018 Honda Civic with Massachusetts plates. It was empty, the engine was running, and the driver's door was open. According to the records, the car belonged to Jennifer Wu, a graduate student at MIT. Her backpack was on the passenger seat, next to what looked like scientific equipment, some kind of electromagnetic field detector, its needle spinning wildly. I recorded everything with my video camera, then continued on my way. About 100 meters ahead was another vehicle, a 1991 Chevrolet minivan, the kind families use for road trips. This vehicle had a Maine license plate, but it was one of the old blue and white plates that had been phased out in 2000. The minibus looked spotless, as if it had just come out of the showroom, but the registration tag said 1991. The interior of the minibus was even worse. 8 people were sitting in their seats, completely motionless, staring straight ahead. They appeared to be a family, a mother and father, 4 children, and 2 elderly people who were probably the grandparents. All their eyes were completely black, and all their mouths were slightly open, as if they were about to speak. They didn't react when I shone my flashlight on them, and they didn't move when I called out to them. But they were breathing. I could see their breath in the cold air. This was the bus I mentioned. It wasn't a bus, but a family minivan. The passenger list I found was actually a carefully planned itinerary dated February 27th, 1991. Exactly 29 years ago. They had been sitting here waiting for 29 years. My hands trembling, I photographed everything. The flash of the film camera reflected off their black eyes, creating an effect that would haunt me forever. For a second after each flash, I could see their real eyes beneath, horrified, aware, silently screaming for help they couldn't get. I continued towards Millfield and the road became busier. Cars from every era since the 1930s, all perfectly preserved, all with passengers sitting motionless like statues with black eyes. There must have been 50 vehicles, maybe more, a parking lot for the lost, all going to the same place. The town appeared around a bend, lit up like Christmas lights. Every building glowed with warm light. Smoke rose from the chimneys, and this time I could hear music. A big band from the 1940s playing in the diner. The 52 Buick was still parked in front of the general store, still running after all these years. But now there were people on the streets. Dozens of people, all walking with purpose, all heading toward the church. They moved in perfect harmony, their steps perfectly in sync, like a choreographed dance. Some wore modern clothes, others wore clothes reflecting the style of decades past. As I walked, I noticed something else. They were all the same height. Exactly the same height. It was as if something had adjusted them to fit a specific parameter. I parked my car and got out, taking my grandfather's rosary in my hand. The moment my feet touched the ground, I felt it, a magnetic pull, drawing me toward the church. The rosary in my hand began to heat up, almost burning, fighting whatever was trying to control me. I recorded everything, watching the crowd from a distance. The church doors were open, light was spilling out, and the singing had started again. But this time I could understand the words, even though they weren't in English, French, or any language I knew. The return home signaled the end of the long wait, the door finally opening. The church interior was packed, every row filled. Hundreds of people, far more than the building could hold. They were impossibly piled on top of each other, occupying the same space without touching, existing in layers that were painful to perceive. And on the podium stood someone I recognized. It was Chief Harold Ashford of the Millfield Police Department. I had seen his photo in newspapers from 1931. He looked exactly the same. Mid-40s, thick mustache, uniform. But his eyes weren't black, they were worse. Normal, human, and completely insane. "Welcome, Trooper Theriault," he said, his voice echoing in everyone's throats in the church. "We've been expecting you. Your family has always been sensitive to fine places. Your grandfather knew that. He visited us once in 1952. You're lying," I said, gripping the rosary tighter. "Is that so?" Chief Ashford smiled, and it was the smile of someone who had been waiting a very long time to make a joke. "Ask yourself why that rosary was specifically blessed against things between worlds. Ask yourself why it warned you about a path you shouldn't take. He had been here. He had seen what we had become. What are you? We are evolution, soldier. We are what happens when people get stuck in a place where time doesn't flow properly, where the boundaries between dimensions are very thin. We become something that can exist in multiple realities at the same time." He pointed to the congregation. "Everyone here exists in every possible timeline they entered Millfield. The family in the minibus, they're here at the same time in 1991, 2020, 2049, and 1962. We're detached from linear time. That's impossible. So is a road that appears and disappears. A town destroyed in 1931 but still brewing fresh coffee is too. We are impossible, Trooper Theriault, but we exist. And soon we will exist everywhere." Outside, the aurora intensified and the church began to shake. The dark-eyed congregation rose as one, their movements perfectly synchronized. "The solar storm is peaking," Chief Ashford explained. "About once every 20 years, when conditions are right, we can pass through. We can expand Millfield, make it real again in your world. We need enough people, enough consciousness to anchor us. And tonight, there are enough." I backed toward the door, but it slammed shut. The congregation turned to me, hundreds of black eyes reflecting the candlelight. "Your grandfather escaped because he was protected," Ashford continued. "That rosary holds an ancient power from the old country. But it only protects you. What about everyone else on Route 11 tonight? The truckers, the families, the lone travelers who saw our path and curiously entered it?" As if on cue, I heard vehicle sounds from outside. Multiple engines, slamming doors, shouts amid the confusion. The same power that drew me here had drawn the newcomers here too. "Each one feeds our existence," said Ashford. "Every new soul that enters Millfield helps us solidify, become real. And when we have gathered enough consciousness, we will superimpose your reality onto ours. Millfield will exist again, properly, permanently, and everyone who enters it, along with it, will exist at the same time, forever. The rosary was now burning my hand, leaving marks in my palm, but I didn't let go. It was the only thing keeping me from joining the congregation's synchronized movements, from my eyes darkening, from becoming part of Millfield's eternal gathering. "But you are special, Trooper," Ashford continued. "Your lineage can pass through the narrow places without losing yourself entirely. You can be our messenger, our envoy. Return to your own world. Tell them about us. Tell them Millfield will return. Tell them the waiting is almost over. Go to hell," I said, drawing my service weapon. Ashford laughed, a loud sound that came from everyone's throats in the church. "Hell? We are already between heaven and hell, between existence and non-existence. We are where we shouldn't be, and soon, everywhere will be like this place." I shot him. 6 shots, right in the middle of his chest. The bullets passed right through him like mist and hit the wall behind him. He didn't even flinch. "Physical violence no longer affects us," he said. "We are not entirely physical, but you are. And if you don't leave now, while the rosary still protects you, you will join us. The transformation has already begun. Can't you feel it?" He was right. I could feel something changing in my vision. The world was beginning to split into layers, showing multiple versions of the same moment. I saw myself shooting, not shooting, running, staying, all at once. The only thing keeping me anchored to a single timeline was the rosary. I ran. I broke through the church doors. Somehow they opened for me despite being locked, and ran to my car. The streets were now filled with people, newcomers wandering in shock, their eyes beginning to darken. I saw MIT student Jennifer Wu standing next to her Civic, watching her hands shift between solid and semi-transparent. "Get out!" I yelled at her. "Run! Drive! Get off this road!" But she couldn't hear me. She was already caught between 2 worlds, and the transformation had begun. They all were. At least a dozen newcomers, all trapped, all becoming part of Millfield's growing population. I reached my police car and put it in reverse, driving as fast as I could backward on Route 11A. The road resisted me, stretching like taffy, trying to hold me there. The speedometer showed 60 miles per hour in reverse, but the scenery passed slowly. Through the rear window, I could see the aurora shimmering directly above me, and in its light, Millfield was expanding, growing, new buildings appearing where none had been before. Then, suddenly, I was back on Route 11. The storm hit with full force. My car skidded sideways. I frantically tried to correct it, the vehicle nearly overturning, but I didn't lose control. When I looked back, the road was gone. But this time, I could still see evidence of the road's existence. Tire tracks stretching to sturdy trees, footprints leading nowhere, and a message in the snow that looked like an exhaust stain. "We will wait for you." The next morning, the news began to come in. 17 people were missing along Route 11. 17 vehicles were found abandoned in impossible places, partially buried in trees, sitting on snowdrifts with no tire tracks, neatly parked in places with no parking spots. The official explanation was that there had been numerous accidents due to the whiteout blizzard. But I knew the truth. Jennifer Wu's Civic was found half buried in a granite outcrop near Patton, as if it had grown around the rock. The research equipment was still inside, still detecting electromagnetic anomalies that shouldn't have been there. Her family flew in from Massachusetts, and I was stuck there, begging for answers I couldn't give them. How do you tell someone their daughter is stuck between dimensions in a town that vanished in 1931? My hand was badly burned from the detector, with second-degree burns in the shape of beads and a cross. I told my wife I burned it while holding a hot exhaust pipe to help during a breakdown. She knew I was lying but didn't press it. After 20 years of being married to a cop, she knew when not to ask questions. I took medical leave and used the time to dig deeper. I went to Portland, to the Maine State Archives. They kept records there that weren't digitized, weren't cataloged, weren't supposed to exist. The archivist, an elderly woman named Dorothy Sear, glanced at my burned hand and, without a word, led me to a restricted access section. "Your grandfather was here in 1952, she said quietly, after the incident. We've kept records on Millfield since 1931, of course, unofficially. The files she showed me were extensive. Reports from state police, game wardens, and forest rangers, all documenting encounters related to Route 11A and Millfield. But more importantly, there were records dating back even further. French colonial reports from the 1600s about le village qui voyage, the traveling village. Accounts of American natives written down by missionaries describing a place where time folded in on itself, where the dead and the living existed simultaneously. Millfield wasn't the first, Dorothy explained. It was just the most recent example. This place had many names, many forms. It would appear, gather people, then vanish for a generation. But it was happening more frequently now. The intervals were shrinking. She showed me a chart illustrating its appearances. The intervals were indeed shrinking. 100 years, 75 years, 50 years, 29 years, and now just 20 years. If this pattern continued, the next emergence would be in 2031, then 2037, then 2040. Eventually, it would become permanent. "Why northern Maine?" I asked. "Why here?" "Magnetic anomalies," he said, pulling out geological surveys. "This entire region sits atop unusual mineral deposits that affect magnetic fields. Add to that our proximity to the aurora zone, and natural weak points emerge. Well, I suppose. Places where different dimensions touch." He gave me a box of materials to review, had me sign documents I hadn't read, and probably made me promise things I shouldn't have. But I needed to understand. I needed to know if there was a way to stop this or rescue the people trapped there. When I returned to Holton, I set up a makeshift research center in my garage. The walls were covered with maps marked with every known sighting of Route 11A. I charted solar activity, magnetic field fluctuations, missing person reports. A pattern began to emerge. The road didn't appear randomly along Route 11. It followed ley lines, the theoretical alignments of geographic and historical sites believed by some to channel the world's magnetic energy. Each point of emergence coincided with where these lines intersected. And at the center of all these intersection points, like a spider in the middle of its web, was Millfield's original location. I began visiting other officers who had encountered similar incidents. Most didn't want to talk at first, but when I showed them my burned hand and mentioned Chief Ashford's name, they opened up. Retired police officer Jim Bouchard lives in Fort Kent. I saw it in '91. I lost my partner there. They said he abandoned his post, but I knew the truth. He went into that town and never came out. Sometimes at night on the radio, I hear him calling for backup from a place that doesn't exist. Still active gamekeeper Susan Pelletier lives in Ashland. I found him in 2001 while tracking an injured deer. The deer ran toward the town and suddenly froze, as if turned to stone. As far as I know, it's still standing there. I marked the GPS coordinates, but when I returned with the team the next day, there was nothing but forest. Forest Ranger Mike Thibodeau receives disability benefits due to a mental health issue. It's not just Millfield. There are other smaller places, too. Ghost lumber camps that appear during the full moon. An old ferry crossing in Allagash where you can sometimes see boats from the 1800s. They're all connected somehow, all part of the same phenomenon. The most disturbing interview was with retired State Police Captain Ernest Michaud. He was part of a task force that officially investigated Millfield in 1991. "We went in full force," he told me, pouring whiskey into his coffee with trembling hands. 12 officers, 2 scientists from the university, and a representative from the Catholic Church. Yes, they knew about it too. The plan was to document everything, find a scientific explanation, maybe even find a way to shut it down. What happened? We found the way easily. It wants to be found when the conditions are right. We drove to the town. But the moment we entered, we split up. Not physically, we were all still there, standing side by side. But each of us was in our own version of Millfield. I could see my team, but they couldn't see me. Each of us was alone in a town filled with dark-eyed people from different time periods. After taking a long sip, he continued. Scientist Doctor. Patricia Morse had a theory. She said we were experiencing quantum decoherence. Each observer collapsed the wave function differently, creating parallel versions of the same space. The only way to resynchronize was to stop observing, close our eyes, and let someone else's observation define reality. Did it work? For 11 of us, yes. We escaped by following Father Laurent. He was probably the only one unaffected by this effect, likely due to his faith or a sacred object he carried. But Detective Celine Cross, she opened her eyes too soon. She saw something between the overlapping realities. When we returned to Route 11, she was in a catatonic state. Since then, she's been in a psychiatric clinic in Augusta, drawing the same picture over and over. A town existing simultaneously in all times. The next day, I visited Detective Cross. The Augusta Mental Health Institute was a gloomy place, but the staff knew me and let me in out of professional courtesy. Celine was now in her 60s, her hair completely white, her eyes vacant. The walls of her room were covered with the same picture, repeated thousands of times. Millfield, but layered, all the repetitions piled on top of each other, like a multiple exposure photograph. When she saw me, her eyes focused for a moment. "You were there," she said, her voice hoarse from years of silence. "I can see it in you." The shadow of a place that shouldn't be. "How can I stop this?" I asked. He laughed with a sound like breaking glass. "Stop it? You can't. It's already here everywhere. Most of the time we just can't see it. But it's growing stronger, feeding off everyone who enters there. Soon, it won't need solar storms or magnetic alignments. It'll be able to appear whenever it wants. There must be a way." "There is," he cut me off. "But you won't like it." In the clear moments between murmurs, he explained that Millfield existed in a quantum superposition, simultaneously real and unreal, present and absent. The only way to bury it definitively in nothingness was to eliminate all observers who saw it, all consciousness. Every person who sees Millfield, who knows of its existence, is an anchor that makes it partially real, he said. If we all die, if all witnesses are eliminated, it could revert to being a possibility rather than a reality. That's hundreds of people, maybe thousands, if you count everyone who's seen something over the decades. Exactly. That's why it's unstoppable. Too many anchors, too many observers. The best we can do is warn people, keep them away during dangerous times. But even as he said it, I knew it wouldn't work. People are curious. If they see a path that wasn't there before, they'll investigate. If they sense a mystery, they'll want to solve it. And Millfield was patient. It could wait. That night, I had a dream. Or maybe it wasn't a dream. I was back in Millfield, but it was different. Modern. There were Wi-Fi signs in the restaurant. Smartphones were being sold in the general store. There were solar panels on the church. And thousands of people were walking in the streets. all with black eyes, all moving in perfect synchrony. Chef Ashford was there, looking exactly the same as he did in 1931 and 2020. This is the future, he said. 2031, 2037, 2040. Every time we return, we become stronger, more integrated with your reality. Eventually, there will be no difference between Millfield and the rest of Maine. It will all be the same place, existing simultaneously across all times. Why did you show me this? Because, whether you want to or not, you will help us. Every time you mention us to someone, every time you warn them, you spread awareness. And awareness is observation. Observation makes us real. You are not our enemy, Trooper Terrio. You are our messenger. I woke up screaming, my burned hand throbbing. My wife held me, asked what was wrong, but I couldn't tell her. How could I explain that by researching Millfield, by trying to understand him, I was helping him become more real? The next morning, I made a decision. I went to Captain Reynolds and handed in my resignation, effective immediately. No explanation, no notice period. I couldn't risk spreading the contamination any further. But Reynolds, a good cop with sharp instincts, knew something was wrong. "This is about the disappearances on Route 11, isn't it?" he said. "The senseless ones." "Sir, I've been a cop for 30 years, Terrio. I've seen things that don't fit the reports, things we put in the file and don't talk about. Whatever you found, whatever you saw, I need to know if it's a threat to public safety." I looked at him for a long time, weighing my options. Everyone I told would be another point of reference for Millfield. But if I didn't warn anyone, more people would disappear. "Close Route 11 during solar storms," I finally said. "Especially the section between Patton and Portage. Use any excuse, weather, construction, whatever, but keep people off that road when the aurora is active." That's not always possible. Then people will keep disappearing. And eventually, something worse will happen. I left the state police that day, but I couldn't drop the investigation. Millfield had marked me, just as he had marked my grandfather, just as he marked everyone he encountered. We become part of his story, threads in a tapestry spanning centuries. I started this recording to document what I know, but now I realize I'm doing what Chief Ashford wanted, spreading the story, creating more observers, making Millfield more real with every person who listens. If you've come this far, you are now part of it too. You know about the road that shouldn't exist, about the town that vanished in 1931 but never truly left. And this knowledge anchors you to Millfield, however small, keeping it tied to our reality. The next solar storm is expected in March 2023. That's when Route 11 will become dangerous. The road will appear, and Millfield will wait, gathering more people for whatever purpose. But there's something else, something I discovered in my grandfather's papers after he died. Hidden behind his Bible, a note written in French. The road appears when the barriers weaken, but it can be closed when the barriers strengthen. The spring equinox, when day and night are equal, when balance is perfect. That is when it is vulnerable. March 20th, 2023. The spring equinox. 3 days after the predicted solar storm. I don't know what my grandfather meant, whether he found a way to close Route 11A, or if he was just hoping. But on March 20th, at Millfield's original location, I will be there with his rosary and anything else I can find that might help. Maybe I can end this. Maybe I can close the road permanently. Or maybe I'll just become another lost soul, another consciousness joining Millfield's endless community. Either way, someone has to try. March 17th, 2023. 3 days before the spring equinox. The solar storm hit exactly as predicted, and the northern lights danced across Maine's sky like I'd never seen before. Green, purple, red, colors that shouldn't exist this far south. I parked on a forest road at Millfield's original site, following the GPS coordinates I'd mapped out, waiting for Route 11A to appear. I wasn't alone. From the archives, Dorothy Sear, Father Michel Laurent, son of the priest who helped in 1991, gamekeeper Susan Pelletier, and, surprisingly, Dr. Patricia Morse, the scientist from the 1991 expedition, were all there. Realizing this might be our only chance to do something for Millfield, they were all there when I reached them. My father left many notes, Father Laurent explained, holding a leather bag filled with religious texts. He believed Millfield was a kind of purgatory, a place where souls were trapped between two worlds. He had theories about how to rescue them. Dr. Morse, sharp as ever despite being in his 70s, had brought equipment that looked like it came from a science fiction movie. Quantum field disruptors, he explained. These devices, theoretical until last year, can permanently eliminate superposition. At 11:47 p.m., Route 11A appeared. This time, it didn't appear slowly. It appeared instantly, as if someone had pressed a button. The road was clearer, more solid, more real than I had ever seen it before. And it was wider, with more lanes, as if it had grown to accommodate the increased traffic. Stronger, Dorothy said, checking the tools she'd brought from the archive. Much stronger than the historical records indicate. We set out on the road with 2 vehicles, my truck and Doctor, Morse's minibus loaded with equipment. The moment we entered 11A, our radio synchronized and all began playing the same broadcast. Welcome, Trooper Thériault. Welcome, everyone. Millfield has been waiting for you. Chief Ashford's voice had been broadcasting for decades. The town appeared instantly, no longer hidden behind curves or in the fog. It stretched out before us, having grown far beyond the charming village I first encountered. There were now modern buildings, a McDonald's with a 1950s vintage design but contemporary menu boards, a gas station selling fuel at 1931 prices but accepting credit cards from 2023. Time periods, impossibly, were seamlessly blended together. And the people. Thousands of people filled the streets, all staring at our vehicles as we approached. People from every era who had ever entered Millfield stood together. I recognized some of the names from the century-old missing persons reports. They stood in a perfect grid pattern as far as I could see. We parked in front of the church, which had become a cathedral-sized structure. Chief Ashford stood on the steps, but he wasn't alone. My grandfather stood beside him. Grand-père Thériault looked the same as he did in 1952, young and strong, wearing the state police uniform of that era. His eyes, unlike the black eyes of the other residents, were the familiar brown I remembered from my childhood. "Hello, Daniel," said my grandfather, his voice carrying perfectly across the distance. "I've been waiting for you." "You died in 1998, I said, my voice trembling. "I was at your funeral. I died. But I also didn't die. A part of me stayed here in 1952 when I left. I live both lives simultaneously. In one, I left and raised your father. In the other, I stayed and became part of Millfield. Now, at the convergence point, both versions are here. If you've come this far, you are now part of it too. You know about the road that shouldn't exist, about the town that vanished in 1931 but never truly left. And this knowledge anchors you to Millfield, however small, keeping it tied to our reality. The next solar storm is expected in March 2023. That's when Route 11 will become dangerous. The road will appear, and Millfield will wait, gathering more people for whatever purpose. But there's something else, something I discovered in my grandfather's papers after he died. Hidden behind his Bible, a note written in French. The road appears when the barriers weaken, but it can be closed when the barriers strengthen. The spring equinox, when day and night are equal, when balance is perfect. That is when it is vulnerable. March 20th, 2023. The spring equinox. 3 days after the predicted solar storm. I don't know what my grandfather meant, whether he found a way to close Route 11A, or if he was just hoping. But on March 20th, at Millfield's original location, I will be there with his rosary and anything else I can find that might help. Maybe I can end this. Maybe I can close the road permanently. Or maybe I'll just become another lost soul, another consciousness joining Millfield's endless community. Either way, someone has to try. March 17th, 2023. 3 days before the spring equinox. The solar storm hit exactly as predicted, and the northern lights danced across Maine's sky like I'd never seen before. Green, purple, red, colors that shouldn't exist this far south. I parked on a forest road at Millfield's original site, following the GPS coordinates I'd mapped out, waiting for Route 11A to appear. I wasn't alone. From the archives, Dorothy Sear, Father Michel Laurent, son of the priest who helped in 1991, gamekeeper Susan Pelletier, and, surprisingly, Dr. Patricia Morse, the scientist from the 1991 expedition, were all there. Realizing this might be our only chance to do something for Millfield, they were all there when I reached them. My father left many notes, Father Laurent explained, holding a leather bag filled with religious texts. He believed Millfield was a kind of purgatory, a place where souls were trapped between two worlds. He had theories about how to rescue them. Dr. Morse, sharp as ever despite being in his 70s, had brought equipment that looked like it came from a science fiction movie. Quantum field disruptors, he explained. These devices, theoretical until last year, can permanently eliminate superposition. At 11:47 p.m., Route 11A appeared. This time, it didn't appear slowly. It appeared instantly, as if someone had pressed a button. The road was clearer, more solid, more real than I had ever seen it before. And it was wider, with more lanes, as if it had grown to accommodate the increased traffic. Stronger, Dorothy said, checking the tools she'd brought from the archive. Much stronger than the historical records indicate. We set out on the road with 2 vehicles, my truck and Doctor, Morse's minibus loaded with equipment. The moment we entered 11A, our radio synchronized and all began playing the same broadcast. Welcome, Trooper Theriot. Welcome, everyone. Millfield has been waiting for you. Chief Ashford's voice had been broadcasting for decades. The town appeared instantly, no longer hidden behind curves or in the fog. It stretched out before us, having grown far beyond the charming village I first encountered. There were now modern buildings, a McDonald's with a 1950s vintage design but contemporary menu boards, a gas station selling fuel at 1931 prices but accepting credit cards from 2023. Time periods, impossibly, were seamlessly blended together. And the people. Thousands of people filled the streets, all staring at our vehicles as we approached. People from every era who had ever entered Millfield stood together. I recognized some of the names from the century-old missing persons reports. They stood in a perfect grid pattern as far as I could see. We parked in front of the church, which had become a cathedral-sized structure. Chief Ashford stood on the steps, but he wasn't alone. My grandfather stood beside him. Grand-père Thériault looked the same as he did in 1952, young and strong, wearing the state police uniform of that era. His eyes, unlike the black eyes of the other residents, were the familiar brown I remembered from my childhood. "Hello, Daniel," said my grandfather, his voice carrying perfectly across the distance. "I've been waiting for you." "You died in 1998, I said, my voice trembling. "I was at your funeral. I died. But I also didn't die. A part of me stayed here in 1952 when I left. I live both lives simultaneously. In one, I left and raised your father. In the other, I stayed and became part of Millfield. Now, at the convergence point, both versions are here. The next 3 days were spent preparing. I met with lawyers, updated my will, said goodbye without telling my wife I was saying goodbye. I couldn't explain that I was about to become a permanent resident of a town that shouldn't exist, trapped in 1931 forever to save everyone. Father Laurent tried to dissuade me. "There must be another way. Even if there is, we don't have time to find it," I replied. Dr. Morse offered to go in my place. "I don't have your quantum entanglement with Millfield, but maybe with the equipment. It has to be Thériault," I said. "That's the deal." On March 20th, 2023 at 11 a.m., I stood at the coordinates where Millfield had originally been located. The spring equinox would occur precisely at 12:03 p.m. Route 11A was not yet visible, but I could sense it forming, reality weakening. I had brought 3 things: my grandfather's rosary, a photo of my family, and my state police badge. The badge I had surrendered but secretly kept. At 11:47 a.m., the road appeared. It looked different in daylight, less mysterious, more melancholy. It was like watching a magic trick with the lights on. I walked along Route 11A, unhurried, etching the real world I was about to leave forever into my memory. When I arrived in Millfield, it was quiet. The townspeople stood in the town square, all looking at the church. Chief Ashford and my grandfather were waiting on the steps. "You came," said Ashford, sounding genuinely surprised. "I told you I would." "The equinox is 8 minutes away," said my grandfather. "When the equinox occurs, you will have to make a definite choice. Choose the timeline where Millfield never existed, where it died naturally in the 1930s. Hold that reality in your mind, and whatever you see or feel, don't let go of it." "What about you?" I asked. "What about you, the one who stays here?" "I'll go back to 1952 and live the life I'm meant to live. Maybe I'll meet your grandmother, maybe I won't. But I won't be split anymore." With a sad smile, he said, "Tell the me who raised you that I'm proud of you for becoming who you are. She died 5 years ago. I know. Tell her anyway. Time isn't linear here." At 12 noon, the gathered residents began to disappear. Their black eyes opened, and togetherness gave way to confusion. Jennifer Wu appeared in her car, blinked in surprise, then drove back along Route 11A, returning to her own time. The family in the minibus awoke from their 29-year slumber, the children crying as they were pulled back to 1991. At 12:02 p.m., only Chief Ashford, my grandfather, and I remained in the town square. "Last chance," Ashford said. "If you stay voluntarily, you can retain your consciousness, exist always aware and in control. If you bind us to 1931, you will be trapped in that single moment forever, reliving the same day over and over. At least it will be a real day," I said. 12:03 p.m. The moment of perfect balance. I closed my eyes and made my choice. I saw Millfield as it was in March 1931, a dying lumber town, buildings in need of repair, people packing their belongings to leave for better opportunities. I held that image, that reality, that single timeline in my mind and pushed everything else away. This feeling was like being torn apart and rebuilt at the same time. I felt Millfield's entire timeline trying to prove itself, but I remained resolute. 1931. Only 1931. A normal town facing normal problems. When I opened my eyes, I was standing in Millfield as it was on March 15, 1931. The buildings were older, more weathered, real. The streets were unpaved, dirt, and the people passing by were the original residents, going about their daily lives, unaware they had become impossible things from other timelines. Chief Harold Ashford passed by me, younger, human, worried about the town's budget and the closing lumber mill. Without recognizing me as someone important, he politely tipped his hat. My grandfather was gone, having returned to 1952 to live his solitary life. Route 11. A was gone, replaced by the only dirt road connecting Millfield to the outside world. And I was stuck, permanently bound to March 15, 1931, reliving the same day over and over, watching the town slowly empty as families moved away, businesses closed, and hopes faded. But this was real, unique, normal. Every day I wake up in the boarding house on Main Street. Every day Mrs. Patterson serves the same breakfast. Every day I walk the streets of a town unaware it is about to be erased from maps and memories. But sometimes, very rarely, there is a glitch in the loop. Sometimes I can see 2023. I can see Route 11, which drivers pass by without knowing there was once a town here. In those moments, I can sometimes send signals that could be recorded with modern equipment. This recording is one of those transmissions, leaking from 1931 to 2023, my voice suddenly spanning 92 years. The road that shouldn't exist is gone. Route 11A will never appear again. The 17 people who vanished in February 2020 returned to their lives without remembering Millfield. The cycle is broken. But I remain here, living March 15th, 1931, forever. This is my punishment and my purpose. I am the anchor holding Millfield in its rightful past. I am the guardian ensuring it never becomes a trap for innocent travelers again. If you're passing through northern Maine and feel an odd urge to veer off Route 11 into the forest, resist it. It's merely the echo of the past, the ghost of a road that no longer exists. Keep driving, don't look back. And if you happen to pass the 52-mile marker at exactly 11:47 p.m. during a solar storm and see something that might be a road glimmering, remember this. Some places are meant to be lost. Some towns must vanish. And some sacrifices are worth making to keep the world normal. My name is Daniel Theriot, Maine State Police, badge number 731. Reporting from March 15th, 1931. Forever. Time is not linear in Millfield. But thanks to my choice, time is linear in Millfield. The road that shouldn't exist is gone. You are safe. Keep driving. This recording was discovered on a digital device found in the woods near Patten, Maine, in April 2023. The device itself appears to date from 2020, but carbon dating of the dust inside indicates it was exposed to atmospheric conditions from 1931 onwards. There is no record of a police officer named Daniel Theriot, with badge number 731, in the current files of the Maine State Police. However, archival records from 1931 show that a temporary assistant named D. Theriot served briefly in the Patten area before disappearing during a snowstorm in March of that year. 17 people reported missing in February 2020 were all found alive, with none remembering the time they were missing. All reported experiencing lost time and vivid dreams about an old-fashioned town. Route 11 remains one of Maine's most heavily used highways. No unusual incidents have been reported since March 2023. The site where Millfield once stood is now part of the North Maine Woods Conservation Area. Camping in this area is not recommended. Time marches on. The past stays in the past most of the time.